Let me tell you something about blind dates. They are either the beginning of a great story or the beginning of a great cautionary tale. There is no middle ground. You either walk away thinking, maybe the universe knows what it is doing, or you sit in your car afterward eating drive-through fries alone and wondering who decided this was a reasonable way for human beings to find each other. Mine was the second kind. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 28 years old and I live in apartment 4B of the Caldwell building on the corner of Sycamore and 5th in the city of Hartwell. I have lived there for 2 years. I work as a sound engineer at a mid-sized recording studio downtown. I keep odd hours, I own too many plants, I make very good coffee, and according to my best friend Priya I am, quote, tragically unaware of how attractive I am, which she says with the energy of someone filing a formal complaint. Priya is the one who set up the blind date. His name was Todd. He was tall, he had good hair, he worked in finance, and within the first 11 minutes of our date he had mentioned his salary twice, his gym membership once, and his ex-boyfriend 4 times with the particular energy of someone who is absolutely not over his ex-boyfriend. I sat across from Todd at a very expensive restaurant eating bread, and nodding and thinking about the pile of laundry I had left on my bathroom floor and whether I had watered my fern recently. The date lasted 2 hours because I was raised to be polite. I smiled and asked questions and laughed at the right moments, and when it was over I shook his hand, actually shook his hand, and said I had a really nice time and walked 3 blocks to my car and sat in the dark for a moment before starting the engine. Really nice time, I said to myself out loud. Marcus, you shook his hand. I drove home. The Caldwell building is one of those old city buildings that has more character than comfort. The elevator is slow, the pipes make noise at 3 in the morning, and the hallways smell faintly of other people's cooking in a way that is sometimes wonderful and sometimes concerning. I love it. I have loved it since the day I moved in and the building super handed me my keys and said, you are going to hear the man in 4A playing guitar sometimes. He keeps reasonable hours, most tenants like him. The man in 4A was named Theo. Theo Vasquez, 29 years old, half Colombian, half Irish, which resulted in a combination of dark curly hair and green eyes that I spent approximately 48 hours trying not to notice when we first met before giving up and simply deciding to notice, and then do absolutely nothing about it because he was my neighbor and I had a policy about neighbors. The policy was do not, just do not. Theo was the kind of person who made a building feel inhabited. He left small chalk drawings on the hallway floor, sometimes little things, a cat, a sun, a wave that disappeared in a day or two like they were never there. He brought packages in from the lobby for other residents and left them outside their doors without notes because he did not see the point in credit. He did in fact play guitar, and he was in fact good enough that on the nights I could hear it through the shared wall it felt less like noise and more like weather. Just something happening in the atmosphere that changed the quality of the air. We had 2 years of easy, comfortable, neighborly friendship. We borrowed things from each other: coffee when someone ran out, a phone charger, once a very specific kind of pan I needed for a recipe at 11 at night. We had the kind of hallway conversations that lasted longer than either of us planned, leaning against opposite walls, talking about nothing in particular and somehow not wanting to stop. We had watched 2 movies together on his couch when neither of us had plans on a Friday. We had shared a pizza in my apartment once during a power outage with candles going and the city dark outside the windows. I had a policy about neighbors. I had broken the policy approximately 0 times because I was disciplined and because Theo had never given me any clear signal, and because I did not know for certain that he was even into men, and because I valued what we had and was afraid of what asking a question might do to it. So I did not ask, I kept the policy. I went on a blind date with Todd from finance. I came home from that date at 9:30 on a Friday night, heels of my dress shoes clicking down the 4th floor hallway, jacket over my arm, still faintly tasting the expensive wine that had not done nearly enough to make Todd more interesting. The door to 4A was open about 6 inches. This was not unusual. Theo sometimes left it cracked when he had music playing and wanted the air to move through the apartment. I could hear the guitar tonight, something slow and quiet, finger-picking, the kind of thing that sounds like it is being played for no audience. I stopped outside my own door, key in hand, and just listened for a second. Then the guitar stopped. Then Theo's voice came through the gap in the door. Marcus. I looked at the door. Yeah, I said. How was it? A pause. I shook his hand at the end, I said. Silence for a moment, then, Come in. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. Theo was sitting on his couch cross-legged with the guitar across his lap, wearing a gray sweater and the same worn dark jeans he owned in approximately 3 identical pairs. His curly hair was doing what it always did, which was whatever it wanted. His green eyes were on me and there was something in his expression I had not seen before, something attentive and careful, like someone watching a situation they have been watching for a while finally arriving at a particular moment. I sat in the chair across from him. It was the chair I always sat in when I was in his apartment. We both knew it was my chair in the same way you know things in a long, comfortable friendship without ever stating them. He was a finance guy, I said. Theo made a face that communicated everything. He mentioned his salary twice in the first 15 minutes, I said. On a first date. Within the first 11 minutes technically. Theo put the guitar down on the cushion beside him. Marcus, he said. I know, I said. Why do you keep going on these dates? I looked at him. Because Priya sets them up and I feel bad saying no, I said, and because, I do not know, everyone keeps saying I should be putting myself out there. He was quiet for a moment. Are you out there, he said, when you go on these dates, are you actually there? I thought about sitting across from Todd for 2 hours while thinking about laundry. Probably not, I said. He nodded slowly. He picked up the guitar again and played a few notes absently, not a song, just sound. You deserve someone who makes you actually show up, he said. You know that, right? Not someone you have to white-knuckle your way through an evening with. I looked at him. There was something under those words, the same something I thought I had noticed 100 times before and always talked myself out of. The same thing that made the hallway conversations go longer than they should. The same thing in the guitar music through the shared wall that felt like it was being played for someone in particular. I had a policy. I said goodnight and went to my apartment and stood in my kitchen and drank a glass of water and stared at the wall that separated 4A from 4B and thought about the look on his face when he said, "Are you actually there?" I was not. I had never been actually there on any of those dates. The question was, where was I? I already knew the answer. I had known it for a long time. I had just been very committed to the policy. The next morning was Saturday, and Saturday mornings in the Caldwell building had their own particular rhythm. The couple in 3C made elaborate breakfasts that sent smells up through the ventilation. The man in 5A jogged down the stairs at 7 sharp. And at some point between 8 and 9, Theo's kettle would whistle and his radio would go on low. An old soul station he had been listening to for as long as I had known him, and I would hear it through the wall and it would be the most reliable thing in my life. That Saturday I was making coffee and thinking too hard when I heard a knock. I opened the door. Theo was standing in the hallway in his sweater and his worn dark jeans with 2 takeaway cups from the bakery on the corner and a brown paper bag. I bought croissants, he said. Can I come in? I stepped back and he came in and put everything on my kitchen table and sat down with the ease of someone who has made himself at home in a place 1,000 times. I sat across from him and we ate croissants and drank good coffee and talked about nothing for a while, a movie he had watched, a plant I had been worrying about, a funny thing that happened at the studio on Thursday. And then the talking drifted into comfortable silence, and we were both just sitting there with our coffees and the Saturday morning city sounds coming through the window. He said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. He looked at his cup. "Are you happy?" he said, "like, in general, the life you are living right now, are you happy in it?" I sat with that question for a moment. I was not unhappy, I said. I like my job, I like this apartment, I like my life okay. Okay, he repeated, you like your life okay. I looked at him. What are you actually asking me, I said. He raised his eyes. I am asking if there is something missing, he said. If you know what it is, if you are actually looking for it or just going through the motions of looking. This was not a normal Saturday morning croissant conversation. Something was shifting in the room. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before weather comes. The air was the same, but the quality of it had changed. Why are you asking me this, I said. He put his cup down. Because I have been watching you go on these dates for a year and a half, he said, and every time you come home from one of them you look exactly the same as when you left, not disappointed, not relieved, just the same, like nothing happened either way. He paused. I do not think you are actually looking for someone, he said. I think you are going through the motions because you think you should be. And I think the reason you are going through the motions is because some part of you already knows something and you are not saying it. The room was very quiet. What do I know? I said, my voice was careful. He looked at me for a long moment. I do not know, he said, that is why I am asking. We looked at each other across my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with croissant crumbs between us and 2 years of hallway conversations, and borrowed pans and shared pizzas and guitar through the wall sitting in the air between us. I said, Theo. He said, yeah. I think the thing I am not saying might also be the thing you are not saying. He was very still. Yeah, he said quietly, it might be. And then nothing happened because we were both apparently the most careful and avoidant people alive, and the moment slid sideways into more quiet coffee, and eventually he went back to his apartment and I stood in my kitchen again staring at the wall. But this time the wall felt thinner. That week was strange and charged in the way weeks get when something has been said without quite being said. We still had our hallway conversations, but they were different now. Shorter and more electric, like touching a doorknob in winter, the contact was brief and the current was real. I went over to his apartment on Tuesday because I heard something fall and knocked to check on him, and he had dropped a shelf bracket and there were books all over the floor, and I helped him pick them up and put the shelf back. And for 45 minutes we were in very close proximity, moving around each other in his small space, and neither of us mentioned Saturday. But I noticed things. The way he handed me books, the way his hand was careful to give them rather than let them drop into my hands, the way he watched me from across the room when I was rehanging the shelf and thought I was focused on the wall, the way when I turned around and caught him looking he did not look away quickly like a person embarrassed. He just held the eye contact for a moment and then went back to what he was doing like he had decided something. Thursday evening I was on my balcony with a glass of wine and the city going gold below me at sunset. His balcony was right next to mine, separated by a low concrete divider. I had been out there maybe 10 minutes when I heard his sliding door open and he came out with his own glass and leaned on the railing. We did not say anything for a while. Nice night, he said eventually. Yeah, I said. The city below us moved and glittered. Marcus, he said. Yeah. I need to tell you something. I turned to look at him. He was looking at the city still, jaw set, the way he looked when he was choosing his words carefully. I have been trying to figure out how to say this for probably the better part of 2 years, he said. And I have kept not saying it because we live 3 feet apart and because I did not want to guess wrong and make things strange. But watching you come home from that date on Friday and seeing that look on your face. He stopped. Well, look, I said. The look of someone who went somewhere they never wanted to go and came home to the place they actually wanted to be, he said. I stopped breathing for a moment. He turned and looked at me directly. I am in love with you, he said. I have been for a long time. I kept it to myself because it felt like the right thing to do and because I valued what we had and because I was scared. But I cannot keep watching you go look for something somewhere else when. He exhaled. When I am right here, he said. The city kept moving below us, lights coming on in the buildings across the street, a distant siren, the usual Saturday sounds. I looked at Theo Vasquez leaning on his balcony railing in the golden evening light with his green eyes and his dark curls and the most honest expression I had ever seen on anyone's face. And I thought about 2 years of guitar through the wall and borrowed coffee, and the chair in his apartment that had become my chair and the croissant conversation on Saturday morning, and the look on his face every single time I came home. I had a policy about neighbors. The policy was the stupidest thing I had ever come up with. I have been in love with you since the power outage, I said. He stared at me. The power outage, he said. We had candles, I said, and pizza, and you told me about how your mom used to sing in the kitchen and you did the voice and I laughed so hard I almost fell off the couch. And I went back to my apartment that night and I sat on my bed and I thought I am in serious trouble. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. That was 14 months ago, he said. I know, I said. Marcus. I had a policy, I said. He laughed, one short real laugh that broke the tension like a window opening. A policy, he said. About neighbors, I said. I thought it was a good one at the time. He shook his head, still smiling. Then he stepped over the low concrete divider between our balconies and stood on my side of it and looked at me from very close. Can we agree the policy is retired, he said. The policy is absolutely retired, I said. He reached out and put his hand on the side of my face, and I leaned into it before I could stop myself the way you lean into warmth without thinking. Hi, he said softly. Hi, I said. He kissed me. The city kept going below us, indifferent and golden, and I kissed him back with 2 years of held back everything finally released, and it felt like the most natural thing that had ever happened, like a song resolving to the note it was always going to land on, like coming home through a door you finally stopped walking past. The thing about realizing you love someone who lives 3 feet away from you is that the next morning is either going to be wonderful or catastrophic, and there is no way to know which until it arrives. I woke up early on Friday morning. The city was still gray outside my window. I lay there looking at the ceiling and I felt not anxious, not the specific morning after anxiety I had felt before in other situations in other chapters of my life. I felt settled, which was new. I made coffee and I heard through the wall his kettle whistle. I smiled at the wall that had been there for 2 years. The wall that had let through guitar music and low radio and sometimes the sound of him laughing at something on his phone late at night. The wall that had been the thinnest and most significant barrier I had ever failed to see clearly. A knock at my door at 8:15. I opened it. He was standing there with his own coffee already made, wearing the gray sweater, hair doing what it always did, and the expression on his face was entirely at ease in a way that made my chest feel warm from the inside out. I thought we could talk, he said. Come in, I said. He came in and sat at the kitchen table and I sat across from him and we talked. Really talked. The way we should have been talking for a year and a half. He told me that he had figured out he was into men in his early 20s after a long, quiet process of being honest with himself that he described as less like a revelation and more like a fog slowly clearing. He said he had not dated much because he was selective, and because most of the people he met felt like pleasant strangers and he had never been interested in pleasant strangers. Then I moved in across the hall, he said, and you were not a pleasant stranger from about the second week. What was I said. Trouble, he said in the best possible way. I told him about my own story, about growing up knowing and not quite knowing, about the long process of being comfortable with it, which for me had happened gradually across my mid-20s in the way personal truths sometimes emerge, not all at once but in increments, like developing a photograph slowly in a dark room. We talked for 2 hours, and when we ran out of the big things to say we talked about small ones, his guitar, my plants, the recording session I had next week that I was nervous about, the book he was in the middle of, the kind of conversation that stretches easily across any topic because the two people having it are genuinely interested in each other in a way that does not need performance. At some point I said, I have one question. He looked at me. Why did you bring croissants last Saturday? I said, you have never just shown up with croissants before. He was quiet for a second. Because you came home from that date with that look on your face, he said. And I thought, if I do not do something soon, I am going to watch you spend the next year going on dates with finance guys and coming home and saying goodnight through a wall, and I am going to lose the window. You almost did, I said. I know, he said. What would you have done if I had come home from the date happy? I said. He thought about it. Been happy for you, he said, eventually, after a significant amount of suffering. I laughed. He smiled at me across the table with the morning light coming through the window behind him, and I thought, this is it. This is the feeling I have been going through the motions looking for, this exact thing, this person, 3 feet away for 2 years. The week that followed was one of the best weeks of my life. We did not suddenly become different people or change the rhythm of our lives. Everything was more or less the same except that the wall between us was gone. Not the actual wall, the building was still standing, but the invisible one, the one made of policy and careful behavior and all the things we had not said. He came over for dinner and stayed. I went over for the guitar sessions I had technically been hearing through the wall for 2 years, but now heard from the same couch, a foot away, watching his hands move across the strings. We went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning because he had been doing that for a year and somehow never mentioned it and I had never gone, which felt like a small impossible mystery, given that I was the one who cared about plants and produce. We held hands in the farmer's market. It was unhurried and unannounced. He just reached over while we were looking at tomatoes and took my hand and kept walking, and the man at the tomato stand smiled at us, and that was the whole event. Simple and right. Priya called on Sunday. So she said in the voice of someone who already knows. The blind date was a disaster, I assume. The blind date was a disaster, I confirmed. And she said. And nothing. I said. Marcus. Priya. A pause. Is there something you would like to tell me, she said. I might have been slightly in love with my neighbor for the past 14 months, I said. Silence. Marcus. I know. Your neighbor. In my defense. You have been complaining about being lonely for 8 months and your person was literally next door to you. When you say it that way. I set you up on 4 dates, she said. 4, I researched people, I made reservations, I spent emotional energy on this. I know and I appreciate. 3 feet, she said. He was 3 feet away. To be fair, it is actually more like 12 feet if you account for the width of both apartments and the... I am going to come over there, she said. She came over the next Saturday with wine. Theo was already at my apartment. The 3 of them, Theo, me, and Priya, sat at my kitchen table, and Priya interrogated Theo with the focused energy of someone who takes the role of best friend's advocate very seriously. She asked him 6 questions. He answered all of them without flinching. By the end of the second glass of wine, she had decided she approved and announced this formally, and that was that. Later that night, after Priya left and Theo and I were on the balcony again, our balcony, because the divider had become a formality we stepped over without thinking about, he put his arm around me and I leaned against him, and the city was going dark below us, the lights coming up floor by floor across the skyline. Can I tell you something, he said. Yeah, I said. The first time I heard you come home, he said, 2 years ago, I heard you unlock your door and drop your keys and then pick them up, and I thought, I wonder what that person is like. And then I met you the next day in the elevator, and you had a terrible coffee from the lobby machine, and you said something about how the lobby coffee was a crime against humanity, and I thought, oh, I am going to be in trouble. I smiled against his shoulder. A crime against humanity, I said. You are very passionate about good coffee, he said. It is a legitimate issue, I said. He laughed quietly. I felt it through his chest. 2 years over a wall, I said. That is a very long time. Yeah, he said, but we had the wall years too. I would not take them back. They made this feel like something that was built rather than something that just fell on us. I thought about that, about all the conversations in the hallway and the borrowed things and the Friday movies and the power outage pizza and the guitar through the wall, about all the moments that had been quietly building something neither of us had named yet. He was right, it had been built, carefully, without blueprints, over 2 years of ordinary days. The best things are, I think. 3 months later, Priya asked me if I was happy, not in a serious way. We were getting lunch and she just asked casually while looking at the menu. Yeah, I said. She looked up. Actually happy, she said, not okay happy, actually. Yeah, I said, actually. She smiled like she had won something and went back to the menu. That evening, I came home from the studio late, after midnight, a long session, the good kind where you lose track of time because the music is pulling you somewhere good. I was tired and satisfied and quiet inside. I got off the elevator on the 4th floor and walked down the hallway and stopped outside my door with my key. The light was on inside my apartment. He had a key. I had given it to him 3 weeks ago, practically, because he was always there and the knocking felt ceremonial at a certain point. He had given me his the same day without me asking. I unlocked my door and went in. He was asleep on my couch with a book open on his chest and the lamp on and the plants on the windowsill doing what they always did, and his shoes off and his curly hair against the cushion. I stood in my own doorway and looked at my apartment with this man sleeping in it and thought, yes. This is the one, this is the version of my life I want to keep living, this exact room with this exact person in it. I turned the lamp down low so he could keep sleeping. I sat in the chair across from the couch, the chair that was mine in his apartment, the one he always waited for me to take, and I watched him sleep for a minute and thought about all the ways a life can turn on the smallest things. A blind date that went nowhere, a door left open 6 inches, a Saturday morning with croissants, and a question that finally cracked the whole thing open. He stirred and opened his eyes and saw me in the chair. Hey, he said, his voice slow with sleep. Hey, I said. Good session. Really good, I said. He made room on the couch without being asked, shifting over, and I went and sat beside him, and he put his arm around me and picked his book back up with his other hand, and we sat like that in the quiet apartment, the city going on outside the window, the wall between 4A and 4B still standing and completely irrelevant. I was actually there. For the first time in a long time, I was completely, entirely there.